A disclaimer at the beginning. Any hopes of this being a good, formal presentation went out the window about a half a beer ago. So I'm going to try to provide you with some good information, but this is probably going to violate almost every rule of Toastmasters, so don't worry about that. Now, I'll at least do it without the beer. The other thing, in terms of taking notes, you are encouraged to take bunches, copious notes for everybody else, not for me. I'm going to be talking more about a mindset change. People have some misconceptions about evaluations, and I'd like you to think different about them. I'm not going to be going into any sort of detail that you need to take notes on, rules or anything like that. Don't worry about that. Just sit back, relax, listen, and think about what I'm saying. Also, this is just my opinion. Some other people might disagree. They're entitled to their opinions. This is America. They're entitled to be wrong. But just keep that in mind. Okay. Evaluations. There is an unfortunate preoccupation in Toastmasters International and Plantation Toastmasters to some degree with the importance of giving speeches. This is understandable. Toastmasters International, for most of its history, the emphasis was on giving speeches. It's not anymore, but people still think that way. And at Plantation, when somebody joins as a new member, they see you getting up and giving presentations, and like Nina did for her icebreaker, and they go, wow, oh, she's so good. I want to be able to speak like her. And so everybody gets this obsession with speaking. Whereas the thing is, you joined Toastmasters for a number of different reasons, but everybody joined Toastmasters to improve yourselves. Maybe you wanted to improve your self-confidence, your self-esteem, you wanted to improve your speaking ability, you wanted to improve your thinking skills, your improv skills, whatever. And you think that the way to do that is by giving speeches. It is not. The best way of doing all of those things is by giving evaluations. And that is the most valuable, the most beneficial meeting role that you can have, and everybody should be aspiring to do that. Here's why. First of all, an evaluation is a speech, but it's better than a 5 to 7 minute speech because it's a 2 to 3 minute speech. And quite frankly, one of the biggest challenges facing most of our members, not just beginning members, but experienced members too, is knowing when to shut up. You've got to be able to learn to speak shortly, to speak briefly. Think about it. You've been in the audience for different speakers. Have you ever been in the audience where a speaker didn't speak as long as you would like for them to have? You say, wow, really wish she had spoken for longer. That was great. Have you ever been in the audience where the speaker went on and on and on and on, and you're thinking, oh, I wish they had shut up about 15 minutes ago? Now, which of those two speakers do you want to be? You want to be, probably, I hope, the speaker that gets to the core of the issue, leaves them wanting more rather than somebody that drones on and on. So you need to learn to speak succinctly, and the way to do that is to learn to evaluate, because you've got 2 to 3 minutes to do an evaluation as opposed to 5 to 7 minutes to go beyond that and giving your regular type of speech. Also, it's a speech, but you don't have any, the reason most people drop out of giving speeches, they'll sign up to give a speech and they won't do it, is I didn't have time. Didn't have time to write my speech. I didn't have time to prepare. It's reasonable. But evaluations, you don't prepare those until after you've heard the person speak. So you've got to learn to write a 2 to 3 minute speech in 15 to 20 minutes. That is a valuable skill. If you can learn to write a 2 to 3 minute speech, that means you can write a 5 to 7 minute speech in about a half an hour. That is a huge skill. And the way to learn that is by doing evaluations. Okay? Evaluations are presentations. You need to have vocal variety, you need to have gestures, you need to have eye contact, you need to have all the things that go into making a speech good. Also, impromptu speaking. Another problem that people have, especially beginning speakers, they write their speeches out word for word, which means they either have to memorize their speech, which you run the danger of losing your place, or they go through their speech word for word, reading it like this, looking up occasionally, and then going back to their speech, and you have to encourage people to get away from that. What you really want to do is to learn to read from notes, so that you simply glance at your notes occasionally, like I have here. You don't have it written out word for word. And again, a 5 to 7 minute speech, the temptation is write it out, because everybody's going to want to do that. Evaluations, you can't write it out word for word. So you prepare simply a set of notes that you speak from. It's a great thing. People want to learn to speak in impromptu speaking. Again, table topics is good for that. Evaluations are better because that's improv. You have to speak impromptu if you're doing evaluation. You can't write your speech out ahead of time. But table topics, they're flexible. It's nice. One of the things we teach you is you really don't have to answer the question. If you get asked a question, you say, well, I want to answer this other question. You can get away with that. Evaluations, you can't say, well, I don't want to evaluate Eric. I'm going to evaluate Alan instead. You can't. You've got to focus. So you get impromptu speaking skills, you get presentation skills, you get fast writing speeds and preparation skills. It is incredible speech preparation. But the best part about evaluation is analytical listening. If I listen to Eric and I go, ha ha, Eric is funny, big deal. Anybody can figure that out. You listen to Eric, he's funny. The question is, why is Eric funny? Is it his pauses? Is it his pacing? Is it the vocabulary that he uses? Is it his facial expressions? Is it his body language? What is it that's behind that? Alan is a master storyteller. That's obvious to anybody. But the question is, why? Why can he tell a story that captivates everybody and other people tell a story and it puts them to sleep? What's the difference? When you can analyze, when you can do analytical listening, that is an incredible skill that companies will pay fortunes for somebody that can do that. They hire consultants. What is a consultant? It's somebody that thinks, that analyzes what they see and what they hear. And that's what evaluations do. You are listening not to what the person is saying, but how the person is saying it, why the person is saying it that way, and that sort of thing. It's difficult to do, but it's a great skill, and the way to develop it is by evaluating. And there's one other benefit of doing evaluations, and I just want to mention this right quick. And by the way, the handout I have is 7 evaluation myths, and I'm going through that speaking is more important than evaluating. There is another myth. It doesn't have to do with evaluations, but it's the idea that all somebody has to do to become a member of Toastmasters is to pay their dues and they're in. That's not true at all. And I'm preaching to the choir here because there's not anybody here that's doing that. But still, I want to pass that along because there is that misconception that all you have to do is pay your money. And that doesn't do it. Paying the money covers our rent, and that's about it. The meetings would not go on without Alan volunteering his time. He's not getting paid or compensated in any way being president. Elisa's not going to be doing it for being president next 6 months term. Teddy didn't get it for being sergeant at arms and that sort of thing. Running the meetings, everybody is volunteering. Nobody's getting paid. Nobody's getting compensated. This is a volunteer effort, and if people weren't doing it, we wouldn't have any meetings to hold. We wouldn't have a club to run. So everybody has got to give back to the club constantly. Now you can give back to the club by giving the invocation, by giving the a word of the day and things like that. But one of the best ways of giving back to the club is by doing evaluations, because you're benefiting the club, you're benefiting a specific member and that sort of thing. Giving back to the club, evaluations are one of the best ways. So I'm sure you could come up with other reasons, but that's just a few of the reasons why I really think that the EVP should not be worrying about that we don't have any open speaking slots. We should be worried about, oh, gee, we don't have any open evaluation slots. We've got people that want to evaluate and we don't have any place to put them. Evaluation is a great role, and I can't encourage you more to sign up for that, and to sign up for that as often as possible. Possibly as soon as possible. But that brings me to the question of, well, am I ready to evaluate? How long do I have to wait before I do an evaluation? A second myth, I think it was number 2, is that nope, it was going down to number 3. You should give at least 3 speeches before you give an evaluation. I don't think you have to give any speeches before you give an evaluation. Being evaluated will give you a sense of empathy for what the evaluator is going through, but that's about it. You don't have to have given speeches, you have to have heard speeches, and you have to have heard evaluations. And in my opinion, in general, you need to have heard about 15 to 20 speeches and about 15 to 20 evaluations before you're qualified to give an evaluation. Sounds like a lot, but when you figure that we're giving generally 4 speakers at every meeting, you're talking about 5 to 6 meetings, and you've heard your 15 to 20 speeches, and you've heard your 15 to 20 evaluations. So join Toastmasters, and after about 5 to 6 meetings, I would say if you're paying attention, you're ready to give an evaluation. Step on up there and start. Now, will your first evaluation be good? Probably not. Sometimes your first of anything that you do is great, but that doesn't happen all that often. Quite often, the first time that you try something, you're really not going to knock it out of the ballpark. That's okay. You're not supposed to be perfect on the first one. But again, people have the worry, and I've had some people to express that, well, gee, you know, what if I give a bad evaluation? Isn't that going to hurt the Toastmaster that I'm evaluating? And that is true. And that is why, when you're giving your first evaluation, who you want to evaluate is an experienced presenter, an experienced Toastmaster. Because if you're evaluating somebody that's relatively new, granted, if you screw it up, you might cause them some problems. They might get upset. We've had actually people to drop out of Plantation Toastmasters, to leave because they got a bad evaluation. You don't want to have to do that. But if you give your first evaluation and you screw it up, and you're not likely to do that, but if you do, and you're evaluating Alan, or John, Eric, Nick, they can take it. That's not a problem. So if you screw it up, they can do with that. It'll roll off. They may, you know, get you after the meeting in the parking lot or something, but they can deal with that. But you don't want to evaluate a beginning speaker when you're a beginning evaluator. That is true. Certainly don't do an icebreaker. Do 2, maybe 3 evaluations till you get confident that you're doing a pretty good job, and now you're ready to evaluate a beginner. Now you're ready to begin to evaluate an icebreaker. But until that point, stick with the experienced speakers. And I mention that because the most common thing I hear is, oh, gee, I was assigned to evaluate Eric. I hate the idea of doing that. He's perfect. What can I say about Eric? He's wonderful. I don't want to evaluate him. No, you do want to evaluate the experienced speakers because they're easier. You're not going to give them any problems if you screw it up. And here's the myth, and it's one of these on there. Yep, number 2. Evaluations, you have to tell people what they did wrong, or you have to tell them some way to do it better. No. And that's a myth. Let me deviate for a moment here. We're not supposed to talk about religion at Toastmasters, but I'm going to do that anyway. Heck with it, I've had my beer. So, Any of you that are atheists or something, just chill for a couple of moments. If God came to you sometime and said, I would like you to evaluate this sunset that I just prepared. If you are a traditional Toastmaster, you're going to feel an obligation to use the Oreo cookie approach and say, well, it's pretty good, God. You did this right and you did this right, but frankly, I would put a little more purple over here and maybe fluff up the clouds a little bit more over here, something like that. It's absurd. If something is perfect, it is perfect. If you don't see any way to improve something, so be it. That's just the way it is. If you don't see anything to improve, just list all the things that they did right. So there's not a requirement that you find something that somebody did wrong, and that means that there's not any problem in evaluating an experienced presenter. In fact, it is better and easier to evaluate an experienced presenter. So definitely when you're first starting out, they're the ones that you should evaluate. All right? Cool. Who should you evaluate? When are you ready to evaluate? Okay, let's get past the theory and getting into doing the evaluation. See if there were any other. Nope. Doing the evaluation. When you want to do a great evaluation, the time to start is before you ever sign up to do an evaluation. At every meeting, you should be evaluating, as though you were the evaluator, at least one of the speakers. You should be listening to them, not for the entertainment value, not for the fun of it, not for the enjoyment of it, but analytically. You should be listening to them to figure out why Alan is such a great storyteller, why John is so funny and Eric is so funny, why Nick is so great at explaining things. You want to understand why they're doing it and be able to explain it to other people. Now, if somebody gets up, even if you're not the evaluator, you're doing something else at the meeting, somebody speaks, Gina speaks, evaluate them as though you were going to be called upon to evaluate that person. You could stand up there and give them an evaluation, an analytical evaluation, explain the things that they did right and possibly make a suggestion for improvement. That analytical listening, that analytical observation is, again, it's a skill that will serve you so well in so many other areas of your life. I would strongly encourage you to do it, and you can do it at every meeting. You don't have to wait until you're called upon to evaluate. Go ahead and do the evaluation anyway. Pick a speaker. Pick more than one speaker if you feel up to it, and do the evaluation for them at every meeting. When it comes your time to do an evaluation, then it'll be a piece of cake. Okay? So, you sit there and you listen to the person analytically. Before I go any further, let me ask the question, address the thing of, I believe this was myth number 7, excuse me. Who are you evaluating? The common thought, and kind of the obvious thing, which tells you that it's wrong, is that you are evaluating the speaker that you just heard. You are not. If you were, the best way of doing the evaluation would be to get with them one-on-one in the parking lot after the meeting, and you could talk to them at length. Instead, you're giving a 2 to 3 minute synopsis in front of the entire club. The reason for that is the evaluation is for them, but the evaluation is also for the club. And so keep that in mind while you're talking. You may say, again, Eric was incredible, my God. I don't need to tell Eric that his timing is great. He knows that. Yeah, but the rest of the club may not know that. So tell the rest of the club, did you observe Eric's timing? Did you see the way he paused before he gave the punchline and that sort of thing? You're talking to the club. So yes, you are doing an evaluation for the speaker, but you are also, even more I would say, doing an evaluation for the benefit of everybody that's listening to you. And if they're paying attention, they're going to improve their speaking skills by hearing the way that you're describing the person that you are evaluating. So it's one of those things that everybody benefits, everything benefits. So have that mindset before you get started. Now, Comes the time, you're all prepared, the person gets up to speak, you listen analytically, you need to take notes. That's the whole thing. Now again, well, I don't remember if I made this as a myth. Yeah, I did. Number 6. In your evaluation, you should answer the questions at the end of each project in the manual. This one I'm going to get some flack on because the traditional Toastmasters approach, and I know there are even some people in Plantation Toastmasters that like this approach. They're entitled to their opinion. I disagree though. I think the manual is good. The manual is a guide to what you should be looking for, to what you should be analyzing. But the manual is written, obviously, for everybody. It's written for the average speaker, and we're not average. And so I think you should use the manual as a guide for what you should be looking for. But I think going through the manual question by question and answering it is doing a disservice, frankly, to the person that you're evaluating. That's just my opinion. So what I would recommend, now you can find your own approach, this is just the way that works for me, is take a sheet of paper, and when somebody's speaking, when Corey gets up to talk, jot down a couple of words, a word, a phrase. You can start with what's in the manual. Let's say the manual is, say Corey's doing something on body language. Okay, I would write down body language. That's it. I just know it's something I'm going to be looking for. If he does something that isn't in the manual, well, let's say he has spectacular eye contact. He's great. I mean, he goes around to everybody and he's looking them in the eyes. That I write down eye contact. And next to each of these words or phrases or whatever, I put a little check mark if he did it well. If he did something that wasn't so great, I put a little X mark next to it. Says, this needs some work. This is just a reminder to me, because you'd be surprised how quick you forget when you're analytically listening what happened at the beginning of the speech by the time they get to the end of the speech. So you're just writing down for yourself, yeah, he did, this was good. Ooh, that needs some work. This was good. That needs some work. Just a word or a phrase and a little check mark or a plus sign and minus sign, however you want to do it, that indicates at the end of the speech those half a dozen things or so that stood out the most in the person's speech. You've now got your source material. It's time for you to start writing your speech. You obviously can't write it word for word. It isn't going to work. So what you want to do is write an outline. First thing I would suggest is right at the top of this thing, chair. Or if you want to evaluate, I tend to write Mr. GE, so I can remember whether I'm addressing a male or female. MFTM, my fellow Toastmasters, guests, and especially Terry, Toastmaster, Teddy, I'm sorry, Toastmaster Teddy. Sorry. Either you or Terry Conover should be offended, and Oz don't count when you've been drinking. Now, put chair at the beginning. That just reminds you. Again, it doesn't matter so much how you do it. It's just a reminder that you do need to do this. After chair, then you summarize the project that they're working on and their speech. Do not repeat the speech back. You can't, you don't have time, and it isn't necessary. What is necessary, though, is it's maybe been a half an hour since the club has heard this person speak. They may have a short attention span. They may not really remember right off what the person talked about. So just remind them. This was speech number 7 from the basic manual. Research your topic. And in this, Bev gave a history of the Pledge of Allegiance. Bingo! In about 15 seconds, 15 to 20 seconds, I've summarized the project and I summarized the speech so that everybody remembers it. Now I can move on. After this, you pick the 3 or 4 or 1 or 2, depending upon how much detail you want to go into, the good things that they did. Again, 2 check marks could indicate really, really good. It's up to you however you want to do it. But pick the things that impressed you the most about what they were doing. And tell people, you did this really well. It worked because, and tell them maybe a why. Or give them an example. It was really great when you said this, or whatever. Simply go through. You don't have a lot of time. 2 to 3 minutes goes by really fast. So pick several. You don't have to make it comprehensive. Pick several items that you think the person did well. That's it. Give it to them. If they have a suggestion for improvement, provide the suggestion for improvement. Now, I indicated that, going back to number 2 again, constructive criticism. There is no such thing as constructive criticism. All criticism is destructive. I don't care what you call it. There is no such thing as constructive criticism. There is constructive evaluation. There is constructive analysis. Criticism is destructive, and evaluations are supposed to be supportive and encouraging. Do not criticize. Now, that doesn't mean that you whitewash in the evaluations. It just means that if somebody didn't do something right, then just don't mention it. But they did something right. Tell them the things they did right. If they screwed up, then tell them how they could do it better. Don't say you barfed when you were halfway through your speech. That's being a little bit critical. It's going to make the person feel bad. Applaud them. Tell them that when you barfed, maybe it would be a little better if you aimed for the wastebasket. Help people a little bit that way. Make a suggestion for improvement. Help them to move along, but don't criticize what they did. And at the end then, you're basically done. At the end, encourage them. Because again, nobody's getting paid to get up there and speak. And although a lot of people say, oh yeah, I want to, a lot of other people, it's like pulling teeth. And to get up and give a speech and then have somebody tell them what they did wrong can be very demoralizing. And it accounts for people getting up, giving their icebreaker, giving their second or third speech. They get an evaluation they don't think much of, and they don't come back. And they don't renew the next time renewals come around. You want to keep people, it doesn't benefit them, it doesn't benefit the club. Encourage people. Tell them what a good job they did. If they didn't do anything right, then at least acknowledge their courage in getting up there in front of everybody. Look at it from their point of view and tell them what they did well. And at the end, encourage them to come back and not only do it again, but even do it better because you see such potential in them. And if you will do that, if you will make them glad that they came that evening, that they spoke that evening, and that you evaluated them. Out of the entire club, you were the person to give them their evaluation. Then you will have accomplished something then. They will have grown. If the club has been listening, they will have grown, and you will have grown as a speaker also. And so that's it. I strongly encourage you to evaluate, and I may have a little bit of time left. Do you have any questions? Again, this was more of a mindset thing rather than a step-by-step procedure of do this, do that. But I'd like you to start thinking about evaluations different. Evaluations are the single best thing that you can do. You should be aiming to do it as often as possible. Really. And if you become a crackerjack evaluator, it's going to benefit you in so many ways, not just in Toastmasters, but in life. Anything? Any questions?
Is there something that you say to yourself when you feel yourself drifting and you're not paying attention? Is there
when I'm listening
techniques that for example, I'm listening, but sometimes I'm writing down, that would be good to add to my evaluation, rather than just taking it in and because I'm afraid I'm going to forget.
Sure, absolutely. And I don't have a technique for stopping that because I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. How much are you getting paid to do an evaluation? You're not. So, yeah, and that's the crucial thing. If you were a speech coach, then I would say, yes, If you're being paid $150 an hour to analyze somebody's speech, you had better be hanging on every word. And I don't know what it would take, whether it be caffeine or munching on almonds or drugs or whatever. Do whatever is necessary to hang on there every word. But for Toastmasters, it's not necessary because you're evaluating in 2 to 3 minutes what they did in 5 to 7 minutes. So you're missing something at some point, I would say, is not a horrible crime. And certainly you should get something out of it. So if you drift and think about, oh, I could use that in my speech, and you make a note or whatever like that, granted you may miss something, it's not the end of the world. I wouldn't worry about it. So no, I don't have any because I don't try to avoid doing that. I like it when I drift. I just don't like it when I can't find my way back. But that doesn't happen all that often. Good question, though. Yeah. Eric?
I'm thinking that the difference between hearing a speech and evaluating is that one, you're listening to the speaker, and the other way, you're listening to the speech itself, much like an off counter.
Yes.
You can't really listen to the speaker. You need to listen to the speech.
Very much so, yes. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And this is a little embarrassing, but since I usually listen analytically, sometimes somebody will come up to me later and they'll go, about my speech, and I'll go, I don't know what you spoke on. It isn't that I wasn't listening. I was listening intently, but I was listening to how you said it and why you said it and that sort of thing. But you've got to remind me that you were talking about this or that or something like that, because as I was listening to the content, as Eric just described, it was kind of going in one ear and out the other, as my mother used to say. So when I'm listening for fun, for enjoyment, and I'll do that sometimes, that's a totally different experience than analytical listening. But I would strongly encourage you to do analytical listening because that's the one that is really, really beneficial. But you're absolutely right. It's a completely different thing listening to a speaker, just listening as an audience member, and analyzing what they're saying. It's like being a counter, it's like being grammarian, and everything else rolled up into one. You're not, as you say, you're not listening to the speaker, you're listening to what the speaker says. And that's a different thing altogether. Good, thank you. Anything else? Everybody all prepared to sign up to be evaluator next week? Absolutely. Outstanding. Okay. Then I'll turn it back over to Alan.
All right, so to summarize for new people, listen to 20 speeches, you're ready to evaluate. Listen to 2,000, you're ready